Don't get in that elevator. Take the stairs. Don't ask me why. You'll understand soon enough. She said it so quietly I almost missed it. An older woman, maybe 70, sitting on a bench near the lobby entrance with a paper coffee cup between her palms. She wasn't looking at me when she said it. She was looking at the elevator doors. I almost kept walking. My name is Rachel Owens. I'm 31 years old. I'm a licensed CPA at a mid-size accounting firm in downtown Chicago, and I have spent the better part of a decade building a life that makes sense on paper. I track numbers for a living. I find errors other people miss. I do not believe in warnings from strangers. I do not believe in signs. And I especially do not believe in the kind of dramatic gut-feeling moments people describe in therapy sessions and self-help podcasts. And yet, I tripped the stairs. I told myself it was exercise. I was already 3 minutes late for the Thursday evening I'd planned with my boyfriend, coming up to his firm's office on the 14th floor to drop off dinner before we headed to his company's end-of-quarter event together. I had Thai food in a paper bag and new heels that were already pinching my toes. Taking 11 flights of stairs in those shoes was objectively stupid. I took them anyway. By the time I reached the 9th floor landing, I needed to stop. I set the food down on the step, leaned against the railing, and just breathed. That's when I heard voices through the heavy fire door on the 9th floor. Not clearly, just enough. A man's voice and a woman's laugh, and something about the specific rhythm of it, the ease, the intimacy, made my hand freeze on the railing. My boyfriend's name is Scott. We had been together for 4 years. He worked for a commercial real estate development company that occupied floors 12 through 15 of this building. He had no reason to be on the 9th floor. I opened the fire door 2 inches. The 9th floor was a co-working space, mostly empty at 7 in the evening. Through the glass partition near the stairwell, I could see them at a standing desk near the window. Scott, in the charcoal blazer I had ironed for him that morning, and a woman I didn't recognize, tall, dark hair, one hand resting on the edge of the desk, close enough to him that their shoulders were almost touching. He was showing her something on his laptop. She leaned in. He said something. She laughed again, the same low, private laugh that had stopped my feet on the stairs. I could have walked in. I've thought about that moment 100 times since. What would have happened if I'd pushed through that door with my Thai food and my pinched toes and my complete, unshakable belief that I knew who Scott was? Instead, I stayed still. I don't know why. Some animal part of me that apparently understood more than I did. I let the door fall back to almost closed, and I stood in the stairwell and I watched through the gap. He closed the laptop. She said something I couldn't hear, and he shook his head and rubbed the back of his neck. That specific gesture he makes when he's trying to appear more casual than he is. I know that gesture. I know every gesture this man has. I ironed his blazer this morning. Then she held out her left hand, palm down, fingers spread, and he lifted it and looked at something on her ring finger. My vision went strange, not blurry, sharper, like the moment before a migraine when everything edges into too much detail. He was smiling, not the polite smile he gives colleagues or the slightly performative smile he gives my mother, the real one. The one I thought was mine. I let the door close. I sat down on the step with the Thai food between my feet and I thought very clearly, with the particular precision my brain sometimes finds in moments of shock, this is not new. This has been going on for a while. Because the pieces that had seemed unrelated suddenly arranged themselves into a single coherent picture. The way he'd started taking phone calls in the car before coming inside, the unexplained extra hotel night during his conference in Atlanta last spring that he'd attributed to a flight delay I had never actually checked. The 3 or 4 times over the past year he'd suggested, gently but persistently, that I should really look at consolidating my savings into the joint investment account he'd set up. Just for convenience. Just so we're building something together. We've been together 4 years, Rachel. Don't you trust me? I had trusted him. I'd moved $40,000 in 8 months. Slowly enough that it hadn't felt alarming, quickly enough that the account was now well over half of everything I'd saved since I started working at 23. I sat on that stairwell step for maybe 4 minutes. The food was getting cold. My feet hurt. And my entire nervous system was doing something I can only describe as recalibrating. Like a spreadsheet that had been pulling data from the wrong source, finally connecting to the right one. I stood up. I picked up the food, and I went back down the stairs. The older woman was still on the bench in the lobby. She was watching the elevator. I don't know why I stopped beside her. She looked up at me with eyes that were tired and absolutely unsurprised. I said, "Did you know?" She said, "I see things sometimes. I don't always understand what I see. Tonight I saw the elevator, and I saw you, and I knew you shouldn't be in it together." I didn't ask what that meant. I thanked her. I walked to my car, and I sat in the parking garage for 45 minutes planning exactly what I was going to do. I am an accountant. I find things other people miss. I know how money moves and where it hides and exactly which documentation trail it leaves behind. If Scott thought I would be too heartbroken to think clearly, he had confused me with someone else. The joint investment account he managed was through a private financial advisory platform, one of those semi-boutique operations that operates just inside the regulatory lines and mostly serves clients who want flexibility and minimal oversight. He had full management permissions. I had deposit permissions and read-only access to the statements. But read-only access is still access. That night I pulled every statement going back 14 months. Scott had made himself look like a careful, responsible partner. Regular contributions, modest returns, standard allocations, the kind of account activity that looks completely unremarkable unless you happen to know what you're looking at. I knew what I was looking at. The account was structured so that the primary beneficiary and the sole withdrawal authorization belonged to one party, him. It had been that way since he set it up. I had been depositing into an account I couldn't touch without his signature. More interesting was the secondary documentation. 3 months ago, Scott had added a co-account holder to the platform management access. The name on the addition was an LLC, Stairs.Don't Ventures LLC. I spent 40 minutes running that name through Illinois Business Registry records, and I found it registered 8 months ago to a woman named Paige Holloway with a Chicago address on the North Shore. I looked her up. She was a licensed real estate agent, 34. And according to her social media, she was currently in a relationship with a man whose profile I recognized immediately because I had ironed his blazer that morning. Her profile was set to private. His was not. The photos weren't incriminating. They didn't need to be. The pattern of them attending the same events, the same tagged locations, the overlapping timestamps, I printed them all. Then I went back to the LLC filing and read the articles of organization more carefully. Stairs.Don't Ventures LLC had been created for the stated purpose of managing jointly held residential property assets. We did not own any residential property together. Scott and I had talked about buying something, casually, the way people talk about things that aren't actually being planned yet. But we hadn't bought anything. I flipped through the last 4 months of account statements again. There were 3 outgoing transfers I had initially scanned past because they were marked as standard management fees. They weren't large amounts individually. Together, they added up to just over $22,000, all transferred to an account I couldn't trace from the statement. I put the printouts in a folder and set the folder on my passenger seat. Then I opened a new browser tab and spent 20 minutes reviewing Illinois statute on financial fraud and domestic partnerships because I am the kind of person who reads primary sources. It was past midnight. I had been sitting in the garage for over 4 hours. I hadn't eaten. The Thai food was on the back seat getting cold. I drove home, made toast, and didn't sleep. By 6 the next morning, I had drafted 2 emails, composed a text message I hadn't sent yet, and made 1 phone call to my personal attorney, a woman I'd retained 2 years ago to help me navigate a contract dispute with a landlord, who had given me her cell number in case I ever needed to reach her outside business hours. She answered on the 3rd ring, which told me she was already awake, and I said I needed to meet with her as soon as possible. She said, "How soon?" I said, "Today." The meeting was at 8:30. I brought the folder. I brought my laptop. I walked her through 14 months of statements, the LLC registration, the platform access logs, the beneficiary documentation, and my notes on the transfers. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she looked at the folder for a moment and then looked at me. She said, "You put this together overnight?" I said, "I'm a CPA." She said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. First, we filed an emergency petition to freeze the joint account pending a financial dispute review. Illinois law allows a joint account holder to request an administrative hold when there is documented concern about unauthorized or coercive asset management. The documentation I had was, according to my attorney, more than sufficient. While she filed the paperwork, I did two other things. I contacted the financial advisory platform through their compliance portal, not through customer service, through compliance specifically, because compliance departments have legal reporting obligations that customer service does not. I submitted a formal complaint citing potential financial coercion, undisclosed beneficiary conflicts, and the undocumented management transfers. I used the specific language my attorney had coached me on. Compliance departments respond to specific language. Then I sent Scott a text, simple, casual, typed like someone who had no idea anything was wrong. "Hey, I think I left my blue cardigan at your place. Can I swing by around noon to grab it?" The response came in 4 minutes. "I won't be home till 3, just use your key." Good, he wasn't worried. Comfortable people, as I have learned, make mistakes. I did not go to his apartment at noon. I did not go at 3 either. I had no intention of going there at all. But I needed to know where he was and whether he was still performing normalcy. He was. At 11:15 that morning, the platform's compliance department sent me an automated acknowledgement confirming that my complaint had been received and that a preliminary review had been initiated. All transfer activity on the account would be paused pending investigation. At 12:40, I received a call from our shared financial platform's client services number, which I did not answer because I had been advised not to by my attorney. At 2:03, Scott texted me, "Hey, something came up with the account. Don't worry, just a routine compliance flag. I'll explain tonight." I read that text and felt nothing except the particular cold satisfaction of watching someone try to manage a situation they don't yet understand is already over. At 3:30, I met with a forensic accountant my attorney had referred me to. Her job was to formally document the transfer trail and produce a report that could be used in a civil proceeding. She took the materials I had and told me she could have a preliminary finding in 72 hours. Meanwhile, the account was frozen. Scott's access privileges had been flagged. The Tradewind Ventures LLC was now part of a formal paper trail. I went home. I made actual dinner this time. I sat at my kitchen table and I thought about the past 4 years, all the ordinary evenings and the small kindnesses and the 23 days we'd spent in Portugal 2 summers ago, which had felt like the truest version of us. I let myself be sad about that for a while, not performing sadness, actually feeling it. That version of things had been real, or at least I had experienced it as real, and there is a kind of grief in realizing that what was real to you was strategic to someone else. Then I put the dishes in the dishwasher, and I opened my laptop and I kept working. Scott called at 6:47. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was calm, measured, a little strained at the edges. He wanted to explain the compliance situation. It was nothing serious, just an administrative flag he needed to clear up. Could I call him back tonight? I did not call him back. He called again at 8:12, and at 9:40, and at 10:55. The last voicemail was less measured. His voice had that specific texture it gets when he's frustrated but trying not to show it. Clipped consonants, a fraction of a second too long between sentences. He said he knew I was probably worried and he just wanted to talk. I wasn't worried. I was making notes for the forensic accountant. The next morning he appeared at my apartment. I heard him knock 3 times firm, the knock of a person who expects to be let in. I stood in my kitchen and waited. He knocked again. Then he said my name through the door once, the way you say someone's name when you're trying to project patience you don't actually have. I opened the door. He looked like he hadn't slept. The confidence he normally carries, that easy, slightly proprietary quality he has in professional settings, was missing. What was left looked like someone trying to remember which version of himself was supposed to be standing there. "We need to talk," he said. I stepped back and let him in. I didn't offer coffee. He sat down on the couch and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. His problem-solving posture, the one he uses in serious conversations when he wants to look engaged, and he started talking immediately. There was a compliance review. It was triggered by something administrative. He hadn't been transparent enough about how the account was structured, and he understood that might have felt alarming when I discovered it, but it wasn't what it looked like. I sat in the armchair across from him and said nothing. He explained that Tradewind Ventures was an investment vehicle he'd set up with a colleague for a separate real estate project that had nothing to do with our account. He explained that the transfers I'd apparently seen were legitimate management fees that were documented internally. He explained that he should have told me about the structure of the account earlier, and that was on him, and he was sorry. He explained all of this fluently and with a great deal of eye contact. When he finished, I said, "Who is Paige Holloway?" The room changed. Not dramatically, just the specific molecular change that happens when the air around a conversation shifts from one kind of exchange to another. He didn't look away. He held eye contact for what might have been 2 seconds longer than was natural, and then he looked at his hands. "She's a colleague," he said. "The co-management access was added to our joint account 3 months ago under her LLC," I said. "The LLC was filed 8 months ago. You've been depositing our money into a structure that routes management fees to an entity she controls." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You did this on purpose. The compliance flag." "I filed a formal complaint, yes." "Rachel." "The account is frozen," I said. "My attorney has filed an emergency petition. The forensic accountant's preliminary report comes in tomorrow. The compliance investigation is ongoing." He looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen on him before. Not angry, not calculating. Something smaller and more exposed. He said, "This is an overreaction. You heard something. You assumed the worst." "I didn't assume anything," I said. "I'm an accountant. I read the documents." He shifted forward. His voice dropped slightly, into that register he uses when he's trying to be persuasive rather than combative. "We can fix this. The compliance thing gets cleared up, the account gets unfrozen, and we sit down with the proper financial advisor and restructure everything cleanly. We can do that. That's a solution." "That's not a solution," I said. "That's a reset." He looked at me. "A solution," I said, "would have been not setting up a structure designed to route my money into an account you and your girlfriend control." He opened his mouth and closed it again. I stood up. "I'd like you to give me your key." There was a long moment. He reached into his jacket pocket and he put the key on the coffee table. He stood up. He walked to the door and then paused with his hand on the frame. "I never meant for it to go this far," he said. I genuinely don't know what that sentence was supposed to accomplish. Maybe it was an apology, maybe it was just something that needed to be said out loud for his own benefit. I didn't respond. He left. I locked the door behind him, and then I stood in my hallway for a moment and breathed. Then I went to my desk and pulled up the forensic accountant's preliminary notes she'd emailed that morning, because there were still $22,000 to account for. The formal forensic report came in at the end of that week. The transfers to Tradewind Ventures had been coded as standard advisory fees, but lacked the supporting service documentation required under the platform's own terms of service. The forensic accountant classified them as undocumented withdrawals made through a structure with undisclosed conflicts of interest. She included that language in her report because, as she explained, that language is what triggers civil recovery mechanisms. My attorney filed a civil claim the following week. The claim named Scott individually and Tradewind Ventures LLC as a named entity. It sought full recovery of the transferred funds plus statutory damages under Illinois financial exploitation statutes. Scott's attorney reached out for a settlement conversation within 9 days. I accepted the meeting because my attorney advised it, and I sat across the table from a man I had shared a life with for 4 years, and I was perfectly professional, and I said nothing that wasn't relevant to the settlement terms. The settlement took 3 weeks to finalize. I recovered every dollar that had moved through that account, plus interest, plus a portion of the statutory damages. The recovery terms included a confidentiality clause on his end, which my attorney had specifically structured to leave me free to share the experience without restriction. The joint account was formally closed. All my assets moved back to accounts in my name alone. I don't work at the same firm anymore, not because of him. That change had been coming for a while for other reasons, but the timing was what it was. I took a senior role at a larger firm 6 weeks after everything settled, and I found that starting fresh in a new environment was easier than I had expected. I think about the woman on the bench sometimes. Not obsessively, just when I'm walking through a lobby and I see someone sitting quietly, watching the room in that particular way that suggests they're paying more attention to things than they appear to be. I went back to that building once, about 2 months after everything was over, to meet a client whose office was on the 7th floor. I took the elevator without thinking. It was fine. Nothing happened. It was just an elevator. But when I walked through the lobby, I looked at the bench near the entrance, and it was empty, and I stood there for a moment and thought about what she had said. I see things sometimes. I don't always understand what I see. I have thought about that sentence more than I've thought about almost anything else from that period. Not because I think she was supernatural. Maybe she was, and maybe she wasn't, and I genuinely don't know how to hold that question. But what I come back to is the specific mercy of what she did. She gave me information without explanation. She didn't tell me what I would find. She just told me not to get in the elevator. She let me discover the rest myself, on my own terms, at my own pace, in a stairwell with Thai food going cold on a concrete step. I think about that sometimes, and I think that's actually how most of the important things in my life have worked. Nobody hands you the full picture. They give you a landing. They say, take the stairs. And then what you find, and what you do with it, is yours. I am 31 years old. I am a CPA. I have a new office, a new key, an apartment where every account is in my name, and a folder of documentation that I keep in a locked drawer, not out of bitterness, but out of the professional habit of keeping good records. I do not know who that woman was. I know I listened, and I know that made all the difference. I keep coming back to the moment I was standing on that 9th-floor landing with Thai food going cold at my feet. Not the confrontation, not the legal filings, not the settlement, that specific moment, before I knew anything for certain, when I had a choice to push through the door or stay still. I stayed still, and I think that stillness was the first honest thing I'd done in a long time. There's a version of me that walks through that door swinging. Accusatory, emotional, immediately outmaneuvered by a man who had been rehearsing his explanations long before I ever had reason to ask for them. That version of me loses, not just the money, the narrative, because when you act from hurt before you have evidence, you become the story. You become the unstable one, the overreacting one, the one who made assumptions. Scott was counting on exactly that. He had spent 4 years learning which levers moved me. What he hadn't counted on was that I knew how to read a document. I've thought a lot about what actually saved me in that situation, and it wasn't luck, and it wasn't the woman on the bench. Though I am grateful for both, what saved me was that I had spent 10 years developing a skill that I treated as ordinary, the ability to look at a set of numbers and find what doesn't belong. I'd never once thought of that as something that would protect my personal life. It was just my job. It was just something I was good at. And then one night it turned out to be exactly the tool the situation required. That's something I want to sit with because I think it matters. The things we build in ourselves, the discipline, the knowledge, the habits of careful attention, they don't only serve the purpose we built them for, they travel with us. They show up in the dark stairwell moments when we need something solid to stand on. Scott was smart. He was charming and patient, and he had constructed something that looked, on the surface, like a shared life. But what he built was hollow at the center, because it was built on the assumption that I would never look closely enough, that I would keep trusting where trust wasn't warranted, that my feelings for him would stay louder than my judgment. He was wrong about that, not because I'm exceptional. I almost wasn't. I almost got in the elevator. I almost walked through that door. I almost believed the story he'd been telling me for 4 years because it was a comfortable story and I had chosen it. What I learned from Rachel, from myself, in that parking garage at midnight with a folder on the passenger seat, is that integrity is not just a moral quality, it's a structural one. It's the difference between a life built on what's actually true and a life built on what you've agreed not to examine. Scott had no integrity in the structural sense. Everything he built required someone else not to look. The moment I looked, it collapsed. I don't think I was unusually brave. I think I was finally paying attention. And I think paying attention, really paying attention, even when it's inconvenient, even when what you find is something you didn't want to find, is one of the harder things a person can choose to do consistently. It takes something, a willingness to sit in the cold truths of a thing rather than the warm comfort of a convenient explanation. I have a new key now, a new office. Every account is in my name. I don't know who that woman on the bench was. I know she saw something I couldn't see yet, and she gave me just enough to find the rest myself. Maybe that's all any of us can do for each other. Point toward the stairs and trust that the other person is capable of climbing them. I was. It turned out I always had been.